It's time to start some pepper seedlings, so I thought I'd just do a little video and show you how I do it. I used to use seed starting mix, but anymore I just use some regular soil mix. In this case I'm using some Pro Mix. It's pretty loose, and that's what I look for, something that's going to be really loose and fluffy. And a lot of your soil mixes will have little sticks and stuff in them, little chunks of wood. I don't worry about that unless they're bigger, like some of these here. I might take those out, but if they're just little chunks, I don't even worry about it. It won't bother a thing. Before I even get my pots and soil and stuff ready, the first thing I do is make out all my tags. And I've got a whole bunch of pepper tags here. I'm going to be planting a whole bunch of peppers this year, but the way I'm doing it will pretty much work with tomatoes and eggplants and other things like flowers also. I might vary on the depth, but that's about the only difference in the way I do it. Instead of dumping soil into the pots, I just scoop the soil with the pot like so, and I try to get it full up to about within an inch or so of the top, half an inch to an inch from the top. And I'll show you why later. Then I fill all the pots just like that. For peppers, I usually start my seedlings about 8 to 10 weeks before our last frost date. For tomatoes, I like to start them about 6 to 8 weeks before our last frost date. The earlier you start them, the larger they'll get before it's time to transplant outside. I'm doing this right next to our kitchen sink. I'm using this potting tray, which keeps most, if any, mess contained within the potting tray. If I do make a slight mess, it's very little, so it's pretty easy to clean up. And the pots I'm using are 3.5 inch by 3.5 inch, and the tray is 10 inch by 20 inch. Now that I have all of the pots filled with soil, I'm going to turn our water on, and using my sprayer from the kitchen sink, I'm going to try to saturate all of these pretty well. I want the soil good and saturated, so when I do have the seeds planted, that it'll be the first night or so, it'll be kind of like soaking it in water. Some people soak their seeds in water. And by the way, this is just the way I do things. There's probably better ways. I'm not saying this is the best way. This is just the way I do it. Now that I have all of the pots filled, it's time to plant some seeds. And I used to poke a little hole, drop the seed in it, cover it up. But now, instead of doing that, I put the seeds right on top of the soil. If I was to plant, say I wanted to plant one pepper plant of this type, if I was going to do that, I'd just put 2 seeds, and then if both of them sprouted, I would pick the healthiest one later and remove the other one. But since some of these are project peppers, I'm going to be placing quite a few seeds because I can recognize the phenotype that I'm looking for in the seedling stage. So I want lots of seedlings come up. So I'm going to put, I don't know, maybe a dozen in each one of these pots, and most of these will be culled later. Now I'm going to go ahead and put the seeds in these, and then we'll come back and I'll show you what I do next. Now that I have all the seeds laid out, I take some soil from the same bag that I fill the pots with, and I just cover those seeds up with about somewhere between 1/4 of an inch and 1/8 of an inch, probably closer to 1/8 of an inch. I don't want to get them too deep, but I'll do that until I get them all covered up. Once I have all of the seeds covered up, I'll take my sprayer from the sink again. I try not to use quite as much pressure this time. I just want to soak that soil that I just added And eventually I want there to be just a little bit of water in the bottom of the tray. I'll show you that here in a little while. Once all the water has been soaked up, it's had time to soak up all the water from the tray, then I'll add more water until it's just covering the bottom of the tray. And then I'll leave it for an hour or so, come back, and if it's soaked all that water up, I'll repeat that process until there's water left in the bottom of the tray, just covering the bottom. As you can see in this tray, it's got some grooves that are a little lower than the other parts, and I try to have it just like 1/8 of an inch above the highest part sticking up. And then I found that in the evening, if I leave just a little bit of water like that, eventually during the night or early the next morning, it'll usually soak all of that up, but it'll keep that soil saturated while those seeds are getting moistened real good, and that'll help them sprout a little bit quicker. After all of the seed planting is done, I move my tray onto a heat mat that's on some metal shelving that we have. And this particular heat mat is made specifically for starting seeds. And if you decide to go with a heat mat, make sure you read all the manufacturer's instructions, especially any safety precautions. After you add all of that water, the tray can be pretty heavy, so if you just pick it up on the ends, it might fold in the middle, so keep that in mind when you get ready to move it. For peppers, most of the time, they sprout in about 7 days for us. And I even, most of the time, unless I forget occasionally, I even unplug my heat mat at night. And they still sprout in about a week. After 5 days, we have our first seedling sprouting. And as soon as they sprout, as soon as a couple of them sprout in a pot, I go ahead and put them under the lights. And there's those first 2 pots that sprouted. I have them in a tray with some older seedlings. And most of these will be culled soon. I have about 2 or 3 in that pot that I'm going to keep, and the rest will go. It's day 6 and we have 2 more pots sprouting. These will go under the lights now. Here we are on day 7 and there's quite a few more sprouting, and the ones that don't sprout today will sprout in the next few days. This will give you a good idea of why I plant so many seeds from my F2s and F3s, because they usually produce quite a bit of variety. All of the seedlings that you see here, the seeds came from the same plant. But there's quite a bit of variety. Some are completely green, and some are very dark. And some are already showing pretty good variegation. Now I'll leave these seedlings in here until the weather warms up a bit, and then we'll harden them off and get them ready to go outside for the summer. If you're just now finding this channel and you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.